The market screen was no longer something I opened every time I had a few minutes to spare. The stock was still in my portfolio. The loss was still there. But whether the market went up or down on any given day no longer kept me sitting in front of the screen for very long. I would look for a while, close it, get back to work, go home to my family, and spend time on other things. At home, I bought a guitar and started learning how to play. I rested the guitar across my lap. The neck dipped slightly whenever I changed position. On the screen in front of me were 3 chords from a song I wanted to learn. The dots showing where to place my fingers did not look complicated. But when I pressed down, one string made no sound, while the one next to it buzzed. I lifted my hand and tried again. Then, when I moved to the next chord, the fingers that had just been in the right places got mixed up again. I slowed down and practiced each movement separate. My fingertips gradually began to hurt from pressing down and lifting off the strings again and again. The passage was only a few seconds long, but every time I reached the chord change, the music broke apart. I repositioned my fingers, checked where they were supposed to go, and started again. My phone was lying on the table beside me. When I took a break, I opened my portfolio. The stock was still below my purchase price. At one point, the price had recovered close to where I bought it, then fallen again. But the company's plans stretch over 5 years. I looked at the red number for a moment, locked the screen, and picked up the guitar again. I still couldn't get through that chord change. Over time, the soreness in my fingertips turned into thin calluses. My left hand no longer had to search for each string the way it used to. I could play chords without looking. When I reached the difficult part, my fingers still slowed down. But instead of stopping completely, I slowed the tempo and continued into the next section. My phone also stayed untouched on the table for longer. Sometimes I picked it up to check a message and put it back down without opening the market screen. When I thought about the portfolio, I would quickly check the stock price, read a few updates from the company, then return to work. The projects presented at the shareholders' meeting were still moving forward. The 5-year plan had not changed. The passage that used to break apart every time I changed chords was beginning to come together. I played it from the beginning. My hand slowed down at the familiar spot, but this time I didn't have to stop. The rhythm still wasn't completely even. A few beats were still off, but I could finally play through the whole passage. One finger landed slightly out of position, and the string buzzed. I stopped at that chord, adjusted my finger, and kept playing. My phone lit up beside me. I glanced at the screen, finished the passage I was playing, and only then picked up the phone. The notification was from the company. One of the important projects in its development plan had been rescheduled. The new timeline was longer than the one presented at the shareholders' meeting. The company explained that changing market conditions, along with several external factors, meant the timeline had to be adjusted. I finished reading the announcement and put my phone down. A delayed project did not mean the 5-year plan had failed. Large companies still had to make adjustments when conditions change. Management itself had said at the shareholders' meeting that they were prepared to adapt to situations that could not be predicted. The guitar was back in my hands. I placed my fingers on the chord I had just been practicing and continued the unfinished passage. The news about the project stayed in my mind as I opened several analyses of the market the company operated in. Demand was no longer growing the way it had before. Some forecasts had been revised downward. The numbers were not terrible, but they were different from what I had read when the 5-year plan was first announced. I pulled the shareholders' meeting documents out from the stack of papers on my desk. The folded corners opened to the section on the long-term plan. The targets for the coming years were still printed there on the page. I read the section related to the project that had just been rescheduled, then closed the document. It was only a change in timing. The final goal was still there. The stock price continued to fall. There were still rebounds. On some days, the gain was large enough to bring green back onto the screen. I would look at it a little longer, then close the market. When I opened it again after not paying attention for a while, the price was lower. On the guitar, the chords I once had to place finger by finger had become familiar. The old passage flowed more smoothly now, and I started practicing the next part of the song. There were still places where my hand slowed down. The music still stumbled. I would stop there for a moment, then continue. The company's quarterly report appeared on my computer screen. Business results were below plan. The delayed project still had no date for returning to its original schedule, and the market that had once been expected to grow strongly still had not recovered as expected. I read through each section, then opened the numbers I had saved earlier. One quarter did not define the whole year. One delayed project did not determine the 5-year plan. The difficult period in the market could eventually pass. The stock stayed in my portfolio. The corners of the shareholders' meeting documents had become more worn after being opened so many times. Beside them was the company's latest report. I read through the business results, then stopped at the plan for the next stage. One important target had been revised. I pulled the shareholders' meeting documents closer and found the exact page I had underlined before. The number from the 5-year plan was still there. On the screen was the number the company had just announced for the next stage. I placed the two side by side. This was no longer just about the timeline of one project. Business results had changed. Market conditions had changed. The growth expectations the company was now setting were no longer the same as the ones I had brought home from the shareholders' meeting. I read the report again, then looked over at the old document. Every time one part of the story changed, I had found a reason to keep holding on to it. The project was delayed, so I would wait a little longer. One quarter came in below plan, so I would wait for the full year. The market was struggling, so I would wait for the market to recover. What was happening in front of me kept changing, and whenever I could, I kept fitting it back into the old plan. The guitar was leaning beside the desk. The part of the song I was practicing had grown much longer than those first 3 chords. I reached over and played a few notes, then put the guitar back down. The 2 plans were still in front of me. This time, I didn't close them. I switched to the stock chart. The price was now far below where I had bought it. As I dragged the chart backward, the price line moved back through the past several months, past the day of the shareholders' meeting, and back to the weeks after I bought the stock. The cursor stopped at a familiar price level. That was the price where I had once thought about selling. The loss back then was only a fraction of the number now sitting in my portfolio. I moved the cursor to the current price, then dragged it back up to that old level. If I had cut the loss back then and put the remaining money in the bank, by now that money would at least have earned some interest. Instead, the loss was even bigger now.